Wonderful. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Hillsborough County Diversity Advisory Council meeting. I would like to call this meeting to order now at 6:30 p.m. on today, Wednesday, August 5th. I am the chair, Sabrina Griffith, and I would like us to start now that the meeting has been called to order with the Pledge of Allegiance. So please stand at your respective areas and say the pledge with me. Wonderful. Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Welcome to the Hillsborough County Diversity Advisory Council meeting. I would like 6:30 p.m. on today, Wednesday, August 5th. Chair, Sabrina Griffith, and I would like us to start now that the meeting has been called to order with the Pledge of Allegiance. So please stand at your respective. James, are we going to be able to fix that? Because I didn't even recognize my own voice. County Diversity Advisory Council meeting. I would like 30 p.m. on today,
Ms. Griffith, that's coming from your session.
There it is, right in the background. I got it. Ready?
Yes, ma'am.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Yes, that is the live feed in the background. So I was like, what is going on? Who's that? Whose voice is that? You don't recognize your own sometimes. Oh, that's me.
Hello, everyone.
So welcome again. Hello, everyone. We have not seen each other since June. It is a pleasure to be with you all and in this space. So we'll go ahead and get started. Just make sure, if you can, that you are on mute. And we are going to start with a different agenda today. I know you've received the agenda. We have some special speakers. So we're actually starting the meeting with our special speakers. Our first one will be from Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, Chief Deputy Dana Luzinski. Chief Deputy Luzinski.
Good evening, everyone.
One moment. Can I address these two call-in users? Stand by one moment. Call-in user 813-662. Can you identify yourself, please?
Yes, I'm Marsha Minutello. For some reason, I'm having trouble getting on with the video, so I called in.
Well, good evening, Marsha. You are joined in, and you are labeled, so please go ahead and mute your microphone, and you are checked in, and if Madam Chair recognizes you, just unmute your mic, and you'll be good to go, okay?
I'm calling you on a regular line.
Okay, so I'll mute for you. If she recognizes you or requests for you to speak, I'll go ahead and mute for you. But go ahead, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Did you need to recognize another calling user, James, or are we all ready to go?
I'll go ahead and do the other one. Area code 239821. Can you identify yourself as well?
Yes, this is Norma Henning.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you. And again, as we move forward, Chief Deputy Dana Luzinski, I hope I said your name correctly. We welcome you from the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office tonight and welcome you to share your comments. And thank you for joining us today.
Good evening again. Dana Luzinski with the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office. I'm the Chief Deputy. And I want to thank the council for allowing me the opportunity to be here tonight. I'll start just providing some programs that our office does in the community and then internally for our office and see if there's any questions, because I think it's important to see what you guys feel is important and maybe what we can do to improve some things in our office. The Sheriff's Office has been and continues to be under Sheriff Chronister's leadership, places a huge emphasis on community involvement. And that starts from the top down with the sheriff and I, all the way to our deputies on the street and in our jails. And as everyone in this panel knows, our community is extremely diverse. So it's critical that we develop relationships with all the members in the community that we serve, so we can work together, continue to grow, and improve upon our performance. And first and foremost for us, it starts when we hire our deputies and provide training. It's in that initial phase, we teach them key topics, but it's also throughout their careers. We have a year in-service training. We'll focus on what is important going on at this time in the community, how we need to address our needs. And one of the things for years we've been teaching is de-escalation, although it's been called different names through the course of time for us. We'd certainly prefer to talk through a situation with people and work out the issue at hand as opposed to using any type of force. So that's a renewed focus that we've placed on our deputies, both on the street and in the jail. Additionally, all of our personnel are completing 40 hours of crisis intervention training. And this is not just our law enforcement. We're training every person in our agency. We think it's important for them professionally, but these are some skills they can use maybe in their personal life as well, different situations at home and just everyday situations. But it is for our deputies on the street, but we want everyone in our office to focus on that. Since I have some limited time, I'm going to go over a number of programs that we have, and I can answer and go into more detail later if anybody has any questions. One of the programs we are very involved in, I'm sure Mr. Andrew Warren will be stating the same, is our diversion programs, both at the juvenile and adult level. We feel it's extremely critical that we provide individuals who may have made a mistake, have a lapse in judgment at one point in their life. When people make mistakes, it doesn't mean they're not human. But we think it's extremely critical that we provide them services, get them the help they need to keep them out of the criminal justice system. We'd rather spend energy and resources on helping them address their problems and keeping them out of jail. That's not our goal in the sheriff's office. We want to help and support people. So that is one of our big priorities. We also have deputies in all our boys and girls clubs. We feel it's extremely critical to be involved with children at a young age, support their needs, see what's going on in their lives, help them try to develop good decision-making practices, and really encourage them and make them aware of opportunities around them. Because some of them don't see those opportunities outside their home. And we want to make them know that they can have positive lives and have a positive impact on the community. We also work closely with the junior achievement programs. That's something we just started recently, but we're trying to encourage our youth to realize that there's different careers in law enforcement, not just the patrol officers that they see, but there's opportunities for that. We also work with Cristo Rey High School and their jobs program. We have over 1,000 civilians in our office that support our sheriff's deputies. And I don't think most people realize that. We have opportunities in support services such as automotive, electrical, IT, our financial areas, facility maintenance. So there's opportunities for these youth. If they don't want to be a deputy, that's fine, but there's other opportunities and jobs and careers for them that would be good. So we're really trying to focus on that, to show them these avenues. We have 3 different advisory boards, a Black, Hispanic, and Indian Advisory Council at Schuylkill. And again, this is to work with the community and address concerns that they have and see how we can work together and better improve things. And more recently, we've established 2 Lgbtq liaisons. Both of them are supervisors here at the sheriff's office, and they're working to address the needs of the community as well as some of our employees. We have a Walk It Like I Talk It program. Again, trying to develop relationships in the community where deputies are required to get out of their cars for a certain number of hours a week and walk and talk to our residents, see what's going on. We don't do any good if we drive around in our cars in our own little bubble thinking we know what's going on. We need to get out there and talk to people, see what's going on in their neighborhood, what we can do to assist them. So that's a program that we really are focusing on. I have to say COVID has slowed some of these programs down just because of the close quarters, but these were priorities for me and will remain that way as we continue hopefully to come out of this situation. Internally, we're really working on focusing on diversity in our community staff. I was very fortunate as the sheriff promised me to be one of the first female chief deputy in our office. He's making great strides. He's promoted our first African-American colonel in law enforcement and our first female African-American colonel. Both of those are new to our office and something we're extremely proud of. We need to show diversity in our ranks and our supervisory capacity. And that comes along with our recruiting. We are really trying to have our agency reflect the community we serve. And we have made some strides since Sheriff Chronister came in our office and changed some of the hiring requirements, but we still have a way to go. And that's where we can really use the community's help and assistance. We currently are working with colleges, advisory boards, high schools, and we're now starting a program reaching out to some of the faith-based communities. But it's something that we really need, we know we need to improve on, and it's a big priority for us to reflect the community. So we would gladly take any suggestions on that for adding. I know that was kind of a quick version, so I have 2 to 3 minutes, so I'd be happy to entertain any questions and see how I can help in the church office.
Thank you very much for that. Do we have questions from the board? Please go ahead and let me know if you have any questions so I can recognize you.
Virgil has his hand up.
I'm sorry, I can't see. Who had their hand up? James, was there a hand? I can't see it on my screen.
Sorry, I provided the permissions over, so you should see them going forward. Virgil Perry has his hand up. I don't know if that's accidental, but it is up.
Yes, Mr. Perry, you are recognized.
I've been trying to get my hand down.
Okay.
As soon as I open it up, it's there. But I do have a question. I can't pronounce your last name, but Chief Deputy.
Yes, that's perfect. No worries. Donna will work.
With all of the different things that have been going on, sitting from my house office, I looked out the window and I saw where some deputies came to pick up a man. Evidently he did something he didn't have any business doing. So there were 6 deputies that showed up. And I was sitting here, it was a VA appointment. Then I saw another 4 officers show up from USF's police department, and they all converged on the man's house. The good news is this. I saw one officer who was probably the lead officer, had a white piece of paper in his hand, which was probably the arrest warrant or whatever it was. And they went in the house. There was no, they handled them very, very respectfully. There were 2 female officers that brought him out, had him secured, and, they just walked him to the car. And, nothing out of the ordinary, other than I just kind of thought it was a little overkill for how many officers showed up. But then again, here I am, an outsider. I don't know if there was some kind of threat or something on why they showed up with that amount of force. But just understand that just like I'm watching, there's other people watching in the community. In the military, I was trained as a military police officer, so I know how to have a better respect of what I see than maybe some of the average people in the community. But I was happy to say that everything went smoothly as far as them moving him from place to place. But then again, I just wonder, what is the protocol for how many people should show up for one person?
And that's a great question. We don't have a specific protocol for how many people show up for one person. It really depends what the situation is. And potentially in this case, it sounds like they may have an arrest warrant on charges. It kind of depends on the crime. If it's a violent crime, with a firearms or physical aggression, and the person may have a history of use of force against us, we would send more people just to make sure that they're protected. And we have also, depending on what they're doing, if they're serving a search warrant, which I don't know in this case, you have people to watch the back roads, so people don't run out the back. And it depends if we know how many people are inside. We want to make sure that we keep everybody safe and separated. And sometimes it sounds like if USF is coming, I'm not sure why that is, but sometimes if there's different jurisdictions, it does look like more people. And that's something we need to be conscious of, because we don't want to be overbearing. We want to be safe, but we don't want to be overbearing. It's just like you said, it can get the perception of more people than we need to.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Perry. Jamal Abadi?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief Deputy Lizinski, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you taking the time to meet with us. I have a few questions for you. First thing is I'm not up to date with what is the education requirement for the for today's Hillsborough County or Tampa Police in our county, number one, and what is the average education for each officer, or would you say roughly in an estimate currently? And in that education, in the continuing education that they do, how much diversity is involved in that, and what are the requirements for that, and how they handle certain situations when there's a diverse situation? And lastly, for recognition purposes, what does the department do for positive reinforcement? I know there's Medal of Honors, but is there anything in regards to situations regarding diversity where they are applauded on an annual basis? Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, those are good questions as well. As far as the first educational requirements, until Sheriff Conifer took office, people were required to have a 4-year degree. But we realized, and the sheriff realized, that was limiting a number of people who could apply for the office. You know, there's people who are in situations that they can't afford to be in the academy with pay and not work. They have to work with their family, and we felt that we were missing out on some really good candidates by requiring that degree. So we did change that requirement. So now they need a high school education or GED. I would say, though, probably the average deputy has at least a bachelor's degree in some field. We encourage people as the ranks to pursue higher education, so we can be better educated and work with the community and know the various abilities that are out there. Does that answer the first question on it? As far as implicit bias-based training, we have every year, and sometimes we have additional things. As of things that have been going on in our country recently, we may pull things out and put it out to our troops in the year. Like this year, because we enforced our duty to act, or failure. If somebody sees another doing something wrong, they're supposed to notify, stop it if it's ongoing, and notify their supervisor. So that's an addition to what we do every year. And unfortunately, we had that recently where they reported to the supervisor who was doing something that was not. But we address different issues, whether it's ethnicity, mental health issues, different illnesses that we experience on the job. We want our deputies to be able to respond to those appropriately, and again, try to talk our way through the situation. And we try to do that without having to use any type of force or any type of prejudice in our investigations or our contact with people. That's extremely important to us. The sheriff prides our organization and we do our professionalism, and it's something we strive to improve every day. And then I'm not sure if I understand that the exact last question on recognizing different groups within the organization. we certainly acknowledge the work everyone does, and when they perform well, we recognize that and try to applaud them. We do annual performance evaluations where we note their behavior and the good things that they do throughout the year. We also have different awards throughout the year. People save a life, we perform some extraordinary act or investigation. But it's not specific to a race or anything. It's people doing a great job. We want to recognize that.
Hello?
Thank you.
Hello?
Who's speaking?
This is Marsha Minutello. I have some kind of issues with my video, so I called in, and that seems to be an issue also. I've been trying to ask a question, and I don't know how to do that in a call-in.
Member Minatello, give me a quick second. If Norma and Rich are okay, can I allow Marsha to go next? Okay. Marsha, go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. It's funny because I'm hearing you through the video and through me, so it's an echo. Anyway, this afternoon I had a blood draw, which is not important, but the phlebotomist happened to be a Black lady, and we got into a conversation, and she basically was explaining to me her issues. She decided that she wanted to live amongst her people no matter what. And she has a 6-year-old child and a 17-year-old child. Her 6-year-old happened to experience a time when she had I think a dehydrating incident, and she passed out. And the child was terrified to call the police. Terrified, hysterical screaming. She said she woke up, the mom woke up, and it was all she could do to comfort her, but she was still in a sad state and needed the police. And the little girl was so terrified that she ran into her room. Now, in another issue, her 17-year-old, who gets good grades in school, has had short absences and so forth and so on, had an incident in school. There was a fight in school. And I mean, I'm not going to go into it because, of course, she said he was right and whatever. But the point is, he's terrified of the police also. These young kids are coming up and being afraid of the police. I know some of it is because of where they live and what they're told, and a lot of it is from what they see. Is there any programs that can work with these young kids? She said even the YMCA does not work in the same way that we see a YMCA. They need to be educated how to deal with the police and so forth in a way that they don't feel so hysterically upset.
I agree, and that is extremely unfortunate. That to us is unacceptable, and I'm not sure if you heard the beginning, but we agree with you. We're involved in the Boys and Girls Clubs in the county because we think it's critical that we get involved with those kids at a young age. Support them, help them in whatever issues they may be doing. Show that law enforcement has the good side. It's not just maybe the negative side they've seen in the past. Because our only goal is really to get to help people, and particularly kids. That is, the focus, and that's where we know we can make the bigger impact. We have school resource deputies in a lot of all our middle and high schools, and that's another area where we try to show positive aspects of law enforcement and work with these kids. We also have CRD, that's community resource deputies that work in our communities and go to various events. But again, try to build and develop that relationship because we don't want anybody to be afraid to call us. You call 911, we want to come and help you. And we want to make sure people are secure and safe in doing that. So those are some of the programs we have, and the Tampa Police Department has their different programs as well. But it is something we believe strongly.
How do we reach out? Well, how can we get if those programs are available, how do we get someone like this woman to want to have her kids involved to be sort of deprogrammed from being so terrorized?
One, they could contact, depending where they live, the Boys and Girls Club in that area. It's run by the Boys and Girls Club, but we staff it with the deputies because we want people to reach out and not have that hesitation thinking it's law enforcement one. So that's one avenue. There's different programs in the school, and again, I hate to say I'm not sure what school is going to look like. I think a better answer tomorrow. But when our deputies are in the school, they are available for those kids to reach out to. If the parent wants us to reach out to the kid and try to develop a relationship, we do that.
In this particular case, the son who got into the fight with another young man, the resource officer was involved, and it was a whole thing that wound up in the court, and it wasn't, in other words, basically, they didn't feel confident that resource officer was giving them a fair deal. It may have been. Remember, I'm hearing the story. But the woman I was talking to was really pretty open about the fact that her people want to stay with their people because they understand their people, and it's hard to bring them out into another world. We had about an hour and a half conversation, and it was it was eye-opening for me. But they're even afraid of their resource officers in certain cases. I'm not saying all are, but I don't know how to reach out to these young kids who, for some reason, need to be deprogrammed of being so terrified of police.
I
hear so much.
I agree with you. And again, I'm not saying every deputy's perfect or handles every situation the way we want to. But again, that situation potentially could have been what we were talking about at the verge of prison. We're not going to criminal justice system. And it's something we talk to our deputies about on a daily basis to make sure they utilize that courage. But something rise to a level where unfortunately people may have to be arrested or taken out of that situation while things cool down. But we are open to suggestions. Like I said, we have some of those programs. We have explorer programs where people can get involved as children in law enforcement. But it's ever evolving, and we're willing to step in and do what we can to help and try to repair those damaged relationships.
Thank you very much. I think we have a few more minutes for a few more questions. Thank you, James. Madge, you want to go next?
Hi, thanks, Sabrina. Thanks, Deputy. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes.
All right, Deputy. My question, I want to go back to something that happened about a month and a half ago or so, back in June. If you recall that video that went viral of the 75-year-old protester in Buffalo who was, pushed over by the police. Obviously, that was in Buffalo, not here. And it was a terrible event, and I think we can all agree that that wasn't handled well. But, and I promise I'm getting to my question, but one of the things that occurred in that video that really went, I think, unnoticed by a lot of us, and it was noticed by me because I'm a defense attorney, so I see this kind of thing happening a lot. But one of the things that happened in that video was, for a brief moment after the gentleman fell, another one of the officers who was coming up behind in that row of officers briefly paused to give that man aid. His first instinct, his first reflex was to briefly pause for a moment to help that old man. And all it took was one hand on his shoulder, literally not even a word, just one hand on his shoulder from another one of his officers, his fellow officers. And instead of helping that man, he just got up and went with the officers. And it turned into a them versus us kind of pack mentality. And one of the questions, so the question that I had is, how do we change that mindset in police stations across the country, right? And especially here at home, because I'll tell you, that's anecdotal evidence there, but even in our line of work, you ask any public defender or private criminal defense attorney, and they'll tell you in a country where we can't agree on any set of facts about anything in any workplace ever, surprisingly, every officer has the same exact set of facts and stories that back each other up in every circumstance, right? It is impossible for everyone's stories to be this consistent, right? And what I believe ends up happening is this idea of like social conformity that officers have, where they all kind of decide to get each other's back. What do we do internally in police agencies to break that cycle of, you know, they are there to serve each other rather than serve us? What are some things we can do? Are there anything that you've done, or what is the current research on this show?
Well, I think it starts with training with our deputies. Because we need to make it clear to them that if we see inappropriate behavior that's out of line of our policies, illegal, this wrong, they need to notify. First, they should be stopping it, and then they need to notify their supervisor. I understand what you're saying, that obviously law enforcement, we have a tight-knit community, and we do draw together in times of need, but we're supposed to uphold the law, and we're expected to do that, and we take that very seriously. And we do discipline people if they're not doing that. And I don't know, it was probably several weeks ago, we had one of our sergeants take inappropriate action during the course of arrest. We had 3 deputies come forward and tell us that, and we commended them for doing it. Because we are, again, our sheriff and our organization takes pride in our professionalism. And when we have one person do that, it makes us all look bad. And that goes across the country. We see some of the things that happen are totally unacceptable. And we don't want that to happen here. But it starts with training, it starts with leadership, and continuing to repeat that to our troops and let them know, if you see something wrong, we have your back if you tell us as leadership. We're going to fix that problem.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a few more, Norma?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Because I'm going through my phone now because my audio for some reason doesn't work. Deputy Liaisons, I very much appreciate you coming and speaking to us today. My name is Norma Henning. I'm the representative of Northern and Southern Europe on the council. I'm also the honorary consul of Germany and an immigration lawyer, and work as a civil rights lawyer with the Council on American Islamic Relations. So I kind of fancy myself a little bit of having my finger on the pulse of what the immigrant community thinks and the perceptions that are raised by actions of officials in their official capacity. And I heard from a lot of people and was also very surprised by, and I just want you to take that back. I don't expect you to actually have an explanation for this, but by the public appearance of the sheriff with Pastor Howard Brown up at the river at Tampa Bay Church after he had been arrested for flouting the COVID regulations. And I mean, this was a whole thing. And I understand charges were dropped and that's all fine. But, you know, this pastor is very controversial in the immigrant community, has called for the end of the mongrelization of America. He spins all kinds of wild conspiracy theories against immigrants and marginalized communities. And so when the charges were dropped, I thought, okay, well, that's fine. You know, obviously there was some issue with the charge, but for then the sheriff in uniform to appear on stage hugging and going on about how, you know, are now the greatest of friends, that frankly shocked a lot of my constituents. I was surprised, and I know there's an election going on and all this, but it wasn't really clearly delineated whether this was an election appearance or an appearance in official capacity. And I think when we're talking about the community confidence in law enforcement, when you're then seeing that as an immigrant, knowing the history of this pastor, that kind of gives you pause and makes you wonder. So I don't expect you to have an answer for this, but I would like for you to carry that back, perhaps as a comment from the immigrant community. And I hope, I know the sheriff, we actually are very happy with what he's doing out in most of the communities. That's why we were so surprised when this happened. And that's pretty much my comment. Thank you.
And I'll just make a very brief comment to that, and Mr. Warren may want to answer the charges, but the sheriff goes to a number of faiths, churches, and organizations because we want to show our diversity. We want to show that in this case, religion is important to us. We certainly believe in treating everyone fairly, regardless of where they came from or what their religious belief is. Just because he appeared at that church does not mean he believes in everything, every single word that he said. Because we feel that everybody should be treated fairly by our deputies and the sheriff. But I understand your concern.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we have one last comment or question from Dave Queen.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I believe at one time, one of the original questions and answers, the chief stated that the education requirement was high school now. And I believe if we think that education is the key to success, we've gone back to a 1980s standard that because of the problems we had in the 80s, we raised the standard to an AA. And now I understand we're talking about a 4-year degree. And I understand your recruitment problems, but how can we be successful if we lower the standards that we believe cause some of the disruptions and some of the issues that we've already talked about, from the defense attorney, his stance, from you even believing that we need more training. Training is education. It improves our standard, it improves our quality, it improves our understanding of our officers, our deputies, and their work within the community. I know, again, that we need numbers, and numbers are justified, but at one point, we've got to improve the education level that improves our outreach to the community.
And that's a great question because we did discuss that in great detail. And that educational requirement merely just gets the person moving through the process. That doesn't mean we just select every person. There's still a number of processes and screening that they have to do. We strongly encourage education. We believe that to be promoted, you have to have certain degrees. But we also saw that minority communities were being excluded because they didn't have the college education. And we did not want to exclude them from the process. We pay for people to get their education while they're employed by our office. So we feel if they're a hard worker, their integrity is above repair, they're honest, we can hire them. We'll give them over 600 hours of training in the academy, and then help pay for them to get their education while they're employed with us, because it is important. We just saw too many people being excluded from the very beginning of the process because they had to work to make a living. They couldn't afford to go to college. They weren't bad people. They didn't have that opportunity. So we felt we had to make that change. It's something we continue to look at to see if those individuals who do have problems with it and don't make it through the academy, or if they have disciplinary. We haven't seen that yet, but I do understand your concern because we don't want to revert back to those days. But there's people that deserve an opportunity that will be excluded.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Chief Deputy Luzinski, for your time tonight and for joining us. Obviously, we're sorry Sheriff Cronister couldn't be here, but we definitely enjoyed having you. I do want to share and thank you to our board as well for their questions, our council. I do want to share as well. I have a bonus daughter who just graduated college last year and is in her second week of Hillsborough County Sheriff's Academy to become a sheriff's deputy. So I'm learning a lot. I will have some questions and some feedback when this is done in January. But she seems to be enjoying the process. But of course, especially with her being a Black woman, I do have some interest in her safety in a role like this in general and her experience. I do also want to share before we turn it over to State Attorney Warren that I shared in our June meeting that the story that ended up coming out about the Seffner man who wrongfully detained the 17-year-old who was headed to basketball practice early in the morning. I know that family. I'm familiar with that young man, and I wanted to commend the sheriff's office on how they actually responded and supported that young man from a terrifying experience. And also, State Attorney Warren recognized the fact that I appreciate you charging this individual. This vigilante justice is not helpful at all. And the trauma that our community members are going through at the hands of this is not just a conversation about law enforcement brutality. It is our neighbors and the terrifying experience and what that could have been for that young man. So I'm glad that we are starting to hold him accountable, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that process goes. So I do want to acknowledge both of your areas for the work you've done for that. Chief Deputy Luzinski, you are welcome to stay on if you have any feedback for us as well before we turn it over to State Attorney Warren. Did you have anything else you want to say?
I do need to run, but I believe everybody has my information. And if anybody has any questions or concerns, feel free to call me or email me. And especially with your daughter going through the academy, I know as a mom, it's probably very concerning, but I feel free we're giving them the best training possible. And I say kids, they're adults, but those kids work extremely hard and they're proud of what they're doing and we're proud of them. But I appreciate the opportunity to work with them.
Thank you very much. Okay, so to the council, if you still have your hand up, I think we got everyone. If you can take your hand down, make sure you take your hand down so that James and I can keep up with that. And then we want to turn it over and welcome our State Attorney, Andrew Warren, to our conversation.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Well, first of all, let me apologize because my camera's here and the screen's there, and it's hard not to look at you when I'm talking. Well, first, let me thank you for the invitation to be here today and to talk about the protests that have been going on across the country and our community's response to it. And let me start just by saying that George Floyd's murder was a tragedy and a despicable injustice. And look, murder is murder. If that had happened here, we'd be prosecuting that case as well. But it's important to recognize that the voices of protest that have followed his murder were not born out of that single incident. Obviously, there have been problems in our criminal justice system based on this outdated, antiquated view of criminal justice, one that is so focused on punishment, one that is so short-sighted. It's led to mass incarceration. It's led to massive racial disparities. It hasn't actually addressed the underlying problems that lead to so many people being in the system. And so these are problems that we've been addressing in the state attorney's office for the past 3.5 years now. Making sure that we're rebalancing the goals of the system, not just focused on punishment, but focused on reducing recidivism, on prevention, on rehabilitation, on supporting victims' rights. We're making sure that we've had this ambitious platform of reform that we've set out, and we've had tremendous success over the past 3.5 years in changing what we're doing in the system in Hillsborough County. And this racial injustice piece is such a critical part of that. It's also important that we understand that so many of the problems that we see manifest in the criminal justice system start from outside the system. There are problems with economic opportunities, meaning a lack of economic opportunities, a lack of access to high-quality education. These are problems that disproportionately affect minority communities, economically depressed communities, and they tend to have manifestations in the criminal justice system every day. And now these economic and educational problems are really outside the four corners of what we do in the state attorney's office. But over the past 3.5 years, I have used the bully pulpit that I have to talk about these issues and to do whatever we can to actually reduce the footprint of criminal justice, to make our community safer and stronger outside of the courthouse too, by focusing on those educational and economic issues that lead to problems in the system. So we want to talk about the protests tonight. And look, peaceful protests are vital to our democracy. They're an outlet for frustration and anger. Protests inspire change. And as long as I'm the state attorney, we will wholeheartedly support people's right to exercise their First Amendment, to do so peacefully, and they will always have our support in doing it. But we're not going to tolerate violence and damage and destruction, vandalism that puts our community at risk, our citizens, our businesses, our law enforcement officers, our property. And one of the big problems we've had with some of the violence and rioting that came from those protests was that it actually distracts from the message and the voice of the protests that's so critical for us to hear. But I'm glad to report that it's now been, essentially a month since the protest started here, 2 months. And the voices of protest have largely been heard. And we're in a position now where we're actually converting the energy of this moment into long-lasting change in our community. I mean, we've been working with the NAACP, the ACLU, other grassroots organizations to continue the work that we've been doing in addressing racial disparities. So looking at how we're handling individual cases in both charging and sentencing, making sure that we are being even more transparent within our office about the use of officer-involved shootings and deadly force, so that the community understands how that process works and when we make decisions, why we made those decisions. We are making sure that, look, I'm really engaged in the community because I believe proactive engagement is critical to the success of our office. But we need to do a better job of getting our assistant state attorneys engaged with the community. So we're working with grassroots organizations on that. We're also making sure that we're changing our thinking to make sure that we have stronger minority representation in the ranks of our prosecutors. So that's a very brief overview of what's happened over the past couple months in our country and our community. But I want to, before I open it up to questions, leave it on this note. We have a tremendous partnership with our stakeholders, with our public defender, with our judges, with our sheriff, as well as with the grassroots organizations in this community. And I'm so optimistic just seeing how things have transpired here versus some of the things that have happened across the country over the past couple months, that we're going to end up with real long-lasting change coming out of this, that even furthers the reform that we've been able to implement over the past 3.5 years.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for that. I know that we have some members that are starting to put their hands up, but if I have staff's permission, I'm going to slightly go out of turn with the agenda because I have a public comment that is directed to you, State Attorney Warren. So as long as staff doesn't have any objection. The question that we have from one of our citizens, Joseph McLennan, is about qualified immunity. Why does Tampa Police Department need qualified immunity? It seems to be a rule that can be abused and is being abused around the nation. They also want to know if all reported violations against the TPD will be reviewed by an independent body from now on. If not, why not?
So 2 questions there. The first, qualified immunity is law in the state and the country. And the idea behind it is actually a good thing. It's the idea that people who are in public positions, whether it's law enforcement, prosecutors, county commissioners, shouldn't be sued for doing their job correctly, even if you disagree with the decisions that they make. But the key is that that immunity should be qualified. When someone is violating constitutional rights, that immunity should go away. When someone is committing fraud on the public, that immunity should go away. So as long as that immunity is truly being qualified, depending on the circumstances, then it's a good thing. The problem is when the immunity extends into areas where, well, it makes it really hard to hold somebody accountable, even though they've done these things that go far beyond what their allowed to do where there's a nefarious or even a criminal intent. The second part of the question was, are complaints against law enforcement being reviewed by an independent body? The short answer is no. Most complaints against law enforcement go to the internal affairs of that agency. So that is a quasi-independent body, but it's not really independent because it's within the same agency. So I get asked this question all the time, and Joseph, it's a great one. Andrew, how come you as state attorney haven't done anything about this officer who used excessive force here? We don't even know about it. Those complaints don't come to us. Now, someone can make a request for us to prosecute someone, but we are not an investigative agency. We're a prosecutorial agency. So we're not equipped to go out and conduct the investigation that's needed. The way the system is set up is to have law enforcement review those allegations, and if they find wrongdoing, turn it over to us. And really, that's a conflict of interest. That's why you need a strong citizens review board that has oversight, and you need some accountability within the system. And frankly, you need leaders like, our sheriff has been really proactive about this and making sure that his own ranks are held accountable when in violations.
Thank you very much. Matthew Chinesky, I have something from you.
First off, State Attorney Warren, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I would also like to say, love your new page profile picture. That has become famous nationwide. But I have two.
Matthew, you may have to explain that one, but
everyone just go on Google, search Andrew Warren photo and like Zoom video bomb, and it's quite a story to get nationally known for.
Yes, thank you.
But I have two questions, and they're different from each other. The first one is I was hoping you can give an update on the Amendment 4 judicial process. You've been a great champion in Florida on leading the registration of those individuals and making sure that they're able to get re-enfranchised. But I'm hoping you can kind of help us understand if that's something we should still be pursuing with, if we know people that might be eligible for voter registration before the fall election. I'm hoping if you can give some insight on where we stand on that. And the second question is a recent Supreme Court decision which has added sexual orientation as something that employers cannot discriminate on in the United States. If there is a business in the 13th Judicial Circuit that is found to be using discrimination against employees based on sexual orientation or gender identity, is that something that your office would be dealing with, or is that something at the federal level? So what would be your best suggestion for recourse in that situation?
Sure. So let me address those in the reverse order. The first about the discrimination question. Most likely that is going to be a civil issue. Where it extends into a criminal issue when somebody is violating another person's civil rights, it becomes a federal issue. So the reality is that the federal authorities can bring a 1983 action, that's the civil rights statute, federal statute for discrimination. It's really not something we deal in the state system because, again, it's usually civil, and when it rises to the level of criminal, the feds handle that. The first question about Amendment 4, it's a great question. We could spend all night talking about Amendment 4. I appreciate the compliment. We are extremely proud to have been one of the leading voices across the state in trying to implement Amendment 4. I mean, the reasons are simple. 65% of Floridians voted for Amendment 4 to restore rights to returning citizens. It is fair. Florida was one of only 4 states, now Iowa just changed its law today, that permanently disenfranchises felons. And the reason why I'm involved on top of all those, when you return the right to vote to people, they're less likely to reoffend. So it becomes a public safety issue. So we had our docket in place working with a public defender, the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, and our judges to get people registered to vote for those who had done everything but couldn't afford to pay their outstanding fines and fees. That docket, unfortunately, is now on hold because the federal litigation that we had based our docket on is under review by the appellate court in the 11th Circuit. But what I recommend doing is encourage people to register to vote. If you're a returning citizen and you have completed the terms of your sentence, you're no longer on probation, you're no longer in jail, register to vote. If you owe money, the burden should be on the state to tell you how much you owe. The burden is on the state to figure out whether you're eligible or not. And there's so much confusion around this, and there are a lot of different motivations behind it. But some of those motivations are to discourage people from registering to vote and to suppress the vote, especially of minority communities. Now, that's not all of it, let's be clear, but there are some of those motives out there. So people should be registering to vote and let the state figure out whether they're eligible, the same way it usually works. When I go to register to vote and I say I live in Hillsborough County and I'm 18, if I'm not, the state flags me and says Andrew's not eligible to vote. This is no different. People should be encouraged to register to vote. We are not going to prosecute people where they're registering out of confusion of whether they're allowed or not allowed to do so. So that's the answer. Encourage people to go vote.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you very much. Do we have other questions from the council? And Matthew, I also wanted to share just a plug for our county. I used to sit on the Human Relations Board. So when you ask a question about the discrimination, and especially on the civil level, we do have an additional level of oversight for our county itself, and the Human Relations Board actually gets to see those investigations, those equal opportunity investigations. And when I was there, I got to see a few and worked with Mr. Coleman as well. So there's a lot of work to be done in the area, a lot of work to be done. Do we have other questions? Dave Queen.
Thank you. Mr. Warren, if you believe that the investigations of law enforcement officers and their actions may be inadequate or may be in conflict, is it possible for your investigators from your office to reach out and open up investigations that they may have closed or are pending?
Yes. The short answer is yes, Dave. I appreciate the question. So let me actually answer that in a different context for a moment, going back to something that Sabrina had mentioned before. So the case out of Seffner, where that man racially profiled a young African-American, stopped him, the sheriff's office in that situation did everything right, but they couldn't determine whether or not they could place him under arrest. The deputies on scene aren't lawyers, and this wasn't a straightforward question. So they had sort of closed their investigation. And then as a sign of how well our offices work together, we had asked them to refer to us at the same time through different channels that they were referring it to us because they wanted us to take a second look. So in a situation like that, we can reopen an investigation and we can put eyes on it to say, okay, let's try to look at it through the lens of prosecutors and lawyers to figure out what we can do. The problem is we are not built to be an investigative office. We do have a handful of investigators here, but we are overwhelmed with the amount of requests we have for investigation. And our investigators spend their time working on cases already charged that we are working on or charges that have been referred to us already. So there are some one-off cases where our investigators will get involved in an investigation that was closed. But most of the time, we have to rely on law enforcement for conducting investigations. And sometimes we just refer to a different agency. So if it's an issue at, for example, the sheriff's office, we can ask the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to look into it, or we can ask the FBI to look into it. But we just aren't built to send investigators out and have them start doing witness interviews and gathering evidence and cutting subpoenas as part of an investigation. It would just overwhelm the role that our investigators do to support the prosecutions in cases we already have in front of us. I hope that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. But would an investigation from your office and a conclusion from your office add some independence, if not some validity, to the original investigation?
I think it absolutely would. And I would love to be able to increase the number of investigators we have to go out and actually investigate things that haven't been referred to our office. But we don't have the manpower to do it right now. So again, we sort of pick and choose our battles with that. And if there were cases coming to us, referrals, I shouldn't say cases, to be clear. If there were referrals or incidents coming to us from citizens involving, a rogue law enforcement officer who committed a crime, and we felt like there was something there that needed to be investigated, we would put resources towards that. But I'm telling you now that we actually don't even get those requests. They go to law enforcement agencies, and then we rarely ever see them. So we don't even know that they're out there. I mean, that is, we know they exist, but we don't know the specific complaints that are out there because they stay within the law enforcement agencies for the most part.
And I'm not suggesting that there is possibility of a problem, but what type of resource would it take for your office to see at least the number of closed cases, the percentage of closed cases, the high number of unfounded cases versus the number of credibility or founded cases, if you will, that are out there? I mean, if 99% of everything they investigate is unfounded, is there something there? The same thing with the SO. I'm not saying there actually is, but if your office were to review it, it's a limited resource and a limited man hour to actually be able to add some credence to their investigation.
That's correct. And it depends, the question of what resources would we need, it really depends on what the scope of that review is. Just to review allegations of misconduct by law enforcement, we would need probably a couple investigators. That's it. It's not a huge investment, but also keep in mind that just the way that this is set up from how the agencies work, they are set up to investigate their own. So this will not only require us to have additional resources, which we could, that's part of the problem, but it's actually working with those agencies so that they're willing to essentially cede control of the investigation to us, either to supplement what they're doing or to do it from the beginning. But that's something that we're talking with these agencies now. Now, we've been focused on the use of deadly force rather than non-deadly force allegations of misconduct. But we've been working for the past few years on these use of deadly force reviews because we want to make sure that the community has some trust in the process, which truly is an independent, objective analysis when an officer is forced to deploy deadly force.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you very much. All right, I don't see any additional hands. Do we have any other hands? Okay, Matthew, before we wrap up, go ahead.
Yeah, I just had one more quick question that came to mind. And it kind of goes about what we spoke about, mentioned briefly earlier with that young boy who was illegally and unconstitutionally detained by that man earlier this summer. And it also made me think about Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia and Trayvon Martin a couple of years ago. I think the United States has always had this issue of this vigilantism justice that I think is inspired by, racist prejudice. And so with this being such an issue in our communities, what would be your best recommendation that we can build a cohesive community that discourages vigilantism, or what are some good steps that we can all take so people don't have to be worried about justice being taken in the hands of private citizens instead of something by our law enforcement officers?
So I think there are two things we can do. One is when those situations arise, we need to be willing to do the right thing. We filed that case because we thought it was the right thing. Candidly, it's a tough case. It's a novel case, which is why law enforcement didn't make the arrest at the scene, because we're using a aspect of the statute that's not commonly used, and one where there's no precedent for doing it in the state of Florida. But we believe that if you threaten somebody, even implicitly, into believing that they're not free to leave in that type of situation, then it's a crime. And if the court of law disagrees with us and the case gets thrown out, then we'll appeal it. And if we lose the appeal, we'll take it to the legislature to say this should be a crime, change the statute. Because when I heard about that case, the first thought that went through my mind were the names that you mentioned, Trayvon Martin, Ahmaud Arbery. This could have ended up much worse than it did. And it's really a testament to the young man who was extremely compliant and scared that it didn't end up much worse. But the other question, what can we do as a community to address this? There's no silver bullet solution, but I believe that that type of incident comes from a place of ignorance and a position of a lack of compassion. And I think we just need to do a better job of listening to each other. And I really mean that. And I mentioned it at the beginning about the importance of listening to the voice of the protesters that's going on right now. We spend so much time arguing, in defending, in criticizing, and we don't spend enough time actually listening. Listening to people builds empathy. Empathy leads to compassion. Compassion would have led that man not to stop the 17-year-old African-American that he didn't know on the street. Compassion would have led to Derek Chauvin lifting his knee off the neck of George Floyd. Just having a little bit more compassion in our country and in our state and our community, I think is going to have a huge impact on some of these one-off cases that cause us to shudder.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. One last comment from Jamal Abadi.
Thank you, State Attorney Warren. Really appreciate your time. Mr. Warren, you use terms right now like compassion and ignorance. Those terms have to do with emotional intelligence. So this goes back to my question, or a couple of the questions that when we talked to the Chief Deputy about what we're doing to improve the officers, because you're absolutely right, Mr. Warren, that we always hear whenever these issues arise, all we hear is we hear about the problem, we hear both sides, we hear arguing, but we very rarely do we hear, or we even hear one side saying defund the police, or just quick, easy solutions. We never hear anyone talk about what do we do to improve individuals' judgments, decision-making, and emotional intelligence. What ideas do you have in your position of power that we can do short-term and long-term to help, whether it's from an education perspective or whether it's even for a committee like us or any institution applauding officers like this story that Sabrina just mentioned of an officer that actually thought through the things and de-escalated situations. So for de-escalations or good judgments, what ideas do you have that we can improve?
Jamal, I love the question because it goes to the heart of what I've tried to do as state attorney for the past 4 years and what I'll try to do for the next 4 and beyond. You need a problem-solving approach. There are certain problems in the system we solve by the proverbial tough on crime, right? Lock them up and throw away the key. Those are usually the easier calls. The tougher calls are what do we do with someone who suffers from substance abuse, mental illness, kids doing dumb kid things? What do we do about people who get caught up in the system because they're poor? Which is why I preach and preach and preach to my attorneys here, solve problems. When you solve the underlying problem, you further the mission of the office by making our community safer, by reducing the likelihood of someone reoffending, by helping the victim out. So inside the system, that's everything we do. I mean, from civil citation programs to juvenile justice reform to minimizing the criminalization of poverty to embracing treatment and rehabilitation. This is all problem solving. Outside the state attorney's office and outside the criminal justice system, what can we do as a community? You may laugh, turn off cable news. I mean, I get asked that question sometimes, like, what can we do? Because right here, what we're doing matters. Having this conversation with 50 people who are taking their time on a Wednesday night to learn about what's going on in the criminal justice system, not to yell, not to, grandstand, but to ask pointed questions about what we're doing and how we make things better. That is something that we can do to make things better. So I say turn off cable news, because what I mean is stop just listening to people from the outside who are trying to create dissension, and instead have the conversation with elected officials and other community groups and talk about what's happening here. And I said before, I think that this community has done such a good job over the past couple of months. Not perfect, but such a good job over the past couple of months. And the reason why I think we are better situated to handle these problems is because for a long time we have had these robust civic groups like the Diversity Council, like too many groups that I can name that have been having these conversations. So I apologize, that's sort of a long-winded answer, but I really think these conversations are critical. When you get Republican, Democrat, Independent, old, young, black, white, green, blue, you get people together to actually sit down and talk about what the problems are and finding solutions, whether it's in the system or outside. That is what leads to real change.
Thank you. State Attorney Warren, do you have another minute for one more question?
Of course.
Okay, thank you. Melissa Braswell?
Hi, Mr. Warren. Thank you for being here and taking the time with us. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. I know we talk about prevention, and you guys have done a wonderful job at the things that you've talked about. I've talked to Sheriff Carnister and Julie Holt's office, and I have dealt with that myself. My nephew has been in the system. He's a very young 21-year-old that didn't have support from his family. My question is, once they kind of get through that process, like he's on CC2, we're getting ready to go. Hopefully, the judge told us a year ago, if you make it through 1 year, come see us in a year, and let's see, So we're coming up on that year. He's doing phenomenal. Thanks to the union trades, I got him into a union program. He's working at the Insulators out in Plant City. It just gave him something to look forward to, getting off the streets, getting a mentor, getting him into an apprenticeship program, because the problem is with a felony, nobody wants to hire him. And now that we're in this COVID situation, he's competing with people that don't have a felony. So looking towards the building trades really helped him. Just curious though, and he had an amazing PO. That was amazing with him. But after this whole process, because I know we're gonna get through this process, is there any type of follow-up, kind of like, we talked about the prevention and getting through this and all the different programs you guys have come up with. I was just curious, like, once he's done with all of this, is there anything in place that follows up to kind of like, the one thing he's mentioned to me is like, and I keep telling him, I'm proud of him, we're proud of him, and not saying like his PO probably does probably tell him that too, but kind of just to let him know, because people like don't really understand the struggles that these young people go through that have lived on the streets and coming from off the streets and trying to live a normal life. It's a huge transformation for them, and to feel good about themselves. So I tell them all the time, you're doing an amazing job, and I just wondered if there's like any type of programs to kind of like follow up with them to make sure, they are able to survive and get back on their feet and so forth, just out of curiosity. Because I always feel like, how many other people out there that don't have an aunt like for him to do what I'm doing?
Right.
So I just wondered if there's any other programs out there that are doing type follow-up work, is my question.
There's some good ones, but it's really a burden that should fall on the state. And it goes back to what I was talking about before about this antiquated criminal justice system. Part of the system's goals are making sure that people don't reoffend. And so the idea that when somebody has finished going through the formal prosecution, whether they go through a diversion program, they come out of jail, prison, community control like your nephew, and then we just say, all right, we're done, good luck. We'll see you, hope we don't see you again. it's so short-sighted and nonsensical. And so because we don't actually invest in transition programs, and I use the word invest intentionally, because it's not just spending money, it truly is investment. Because when you invest in that, you reduce the likelihood that somebody comes back, which means we save the $30,000 a year we're going to have to pay when somebody reoffends and we put them back in jail or prison. Unfortunately, that burden has fallen largely to nonprofit groups and to wonderful family members like yourself who pick up the slack to make sure that people coming out of the system have the support network they need.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I appreciate all that you're doing, because I know before you guys won your election, you know, it would have been a lot different if my nephew would have been born 20 years ago. I just know that. So I really appreciate everything that you guys are doing in the community, because it has truly made a difference, and he probably wouldn't have made it 20 years ago. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to hear that he's doing well.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Queen, you still had your hand up. Did you still have something?
No, I just haven't figured out how to put my hand down.
That is perfectly fine. That is perfectly fine. State Attorney Warren, thank you so much for your help and your support in joining us today. I hope that you've enjoyed us as much as we've enjoyed being able to engage you. I do want to say, I know that the citizens want to know so much more from you. However, I think a lot of the energy is directed towards the city council meeting that's coming up. So I think, you know, this is what you get from us today. But we are looking forward to having you again in the future. It would be great to have you visit us more often as your schedule permits, so that we can just find out from you what we can do to work with you to improve relations for our citizens, because we have all kinds of needs all over our county. So thank you so much for your time.
It's my pleasure. I look forward to being back. Stay safe, everyone. Have a great night.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for that engaging conversation. We are going to move forward with our meeting agenda, and I'm hoping I didn't lose anyone. Before we go into old business, again, as long as the staff does not have any objection, Mr. Queen, you jumped right in, and I really appreciate that. We have a new member. Dave Queen is a new member to our group, and I want to recognize him and give him an opportunity to introduce himself to the group and the community that you're representing on the council.
Okay, thank you. And I'm not sure if I have my hand up or down, but I'm here. I appreciate you recognizing me. I don't know whom I'm thanking for my selection for the committee, but I am happy to be here and to add my input. Our speakers were somewhat at a disadvantage in my conversation and not having known me, because I do have experience in law enforcement and as an investigator here in the city of Tampa for the last 30 years. I came up through the University of Tampa and then to Tampa Police Department. And now I currently own my own private investigative agency here in Tampa. So I've always wanted to be involved, but business obligations and business conflicts and philosophy kind of restricted some of my involvement and participation. But I appreciate this forum and the opportunity to meet with you all and discuss different points of view and input. So if I get too far along in my conversations or my input, at least you know where I am coming from.
Thank you very much. We are glad to have you on the team, and go Spartans.
Yes, thank you.
So moving forward in the agenda, the next thing we actually have on our agenda was the public comment. I did share that for the record. I'm going to read it one more time, but I did share that with State Attorney Warren and had him answer it. So on behalf of citizen Joseph McLennan, the public comment was, I wanted to ask Andrew Warren a question about qualified immunity. Why does the Tampa Police Department need qualified immunity? It seems to be a rule that can be abused and is being abused around the nation. I also want to know if all reported violations against the TPD will be reviewed by an independent body from now on. If not, then why not? And he provided his thanks. So thank you to Citizen Joseph McLennan for that public comment. That is the extent of the public comment that we received at this time. If we're still in this virtual format, and even if we're not, for our September meeting, we can probably still continue to expect public comment to be presented to us via email or submission, online submission, and we'll be reading them as they come up. So the next item on the agenda is old business, and that would be our approval of the June 2020 meeting recap. If you can review the meeting minutes that were sent by staff and let us know if you have any questions or any changes to the minutes. If there are none, I would like to entertain a motion to accept the minutes.
I move to accept the minutes.
Okay. You have a motion. Can I have a second?
Seconded.
Seconded by Matthew Chernesky. Okay, are we ready for the question? All in favor of accepting the meeting minutes from June 2020, please signify by saying yes and raising your hand for staff to record you.
Yes.
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 Any opposed? Same sign. Seeing none, the motion carries. The meeting minutes have been accepted from June 10th, 2020. Okay, thank you very much. I hope everyone recognizes that because of our guests tonight, we have adjusted our agenda a bit to make sure that we were giving them ample time, which it seems like we did. So we are going to move forward in the next section of our agenda, which is announcements from council members. Dave Queen, I want to share with you that what we typically do, especially if we're in the room together, we kind of just go around the room. And if anyone has announcements for the community to know, for the council to know, and especially if you have any announcements or events that are happening based on the community that you're representing, that is helpful for us to know as well. So that's usually what we share at this time. I will go based on the way the thumbnails are on my screen, if I can. Matthew Chernesky, do you have any announcements?
I do not have any announcements.
Thank you. Virgil Perry, any announcements?
Yes. I'd like to thank the Board of County Commissioners for nominating me twice to be on this council. But this month is my last month. So I thank those of you that have been around for when I was chair. So folks, my peers raising me up, and then also serving with folks. So I just wanted to thank everyone, the folks that work for the county, and just everyone that I've had the opportunity to work with. And I'd like to say this, that I'd be open to supporting folks as we go down the road for projects, even though I won't be on the council after the end of this month. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Virgil, it's definitely been a pleasure having you on the council. Matthew is raising his hand. I'm sure he has the same thought I have, but I will let him go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Chair Griffith just said and say, Mr. Perry, you have been an inspiration and role model on what a good board member of this council should be. And I really hope that you stay involved in some capacity going forward with whether it's One Hillsborough, whenever that happens, or any other events that we hold. Your support is always appreciated. And I just want to thank you again for your service on this Diversity Council.
Thank you. And Matthew, are you continuing on?
I believe I am.
Okay. Staff, I do not think anything has gone out for the positions that are supposed to be ending at the end of this month. So I'm not sure where we are with that. Because based on the calendar, several of our positions are supposed to be ending. Ellie?
Yeah, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I did speak to Luann, and I believe she was sending out something next week.
Okay.
for the positions that are opening at the end of August, early September.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Okay, Dave Queen, do you have anything, any announcements?
No, not at this time.
Okay, thank you. Melissa Braswell?
The only thing that I would like to mention is the census. If you have not done a census or know anybody that hasn't done a census, please, please, please encourage family, friends, neighbors, faith-based members to please do the census. I actually was a enumerator, and we were told that we were going to be doing door knocking up until the end of October, but then I just read something that is changing, that it's going to be cut off, I guess, the end of next month or something. So just please encourage everybody. They can still do it online. And it's, you know, with Florida being Florida and as much people that have moved here in the last 10 years, please, please, please make sure everybody goes and fills out the census. It's very, very important. I just want to put that plug out there.
Thank you. Yes, it has been shortened by a month, so that's very important to share. Jamal Abadi?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I do have an announcement. I'm not sure if everyone here has heard or watched the news. I know Mr. Warren was advising us not to watch it, but this hit our my community, and actually it's where my parents were born and raised in Lebanon. The huge explosion that happened yesterday, it was a seismic size of a 3.3 earthquake, over 5,000 injured. Right now, they're only accounting 135 deaths, but I'm assuming that's going to go somewhere into the thousands. But it's an incredible explosion. They still don't know what exactly happened yet. There's nothing confirming, but it looks like that it could be an attack. It was an explosion. I guess there was ammonium nitrate that was confiscated in a building, and there was an explosion in the building, and then there was a couple explosions afterwards. It's the aftermath that they're looking and they're investigating, but it was just so sad. There's just so many people here, and there are so many Lebanese Americans in the country that they say if you take all the people that have Lebanese ethnicity and you put them back into Lebanon, that it would be 3 times overpopulated. So it is affecting a lot of people here, and just if you get thoughts and prayers, would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, Marsha Minatello? You're muted. Let's see if we can unmute you. Okay. James, we still can't hear her.
Yes, ma'am. Both of her sessions are unmuted. Go ahead, Marsha. No, ma'am. I would call in, Marsha. It seems like this computer's not being very friendly for you this evening.
Okay. Marsha, let us know when you're in. We'll continue on, but of course we won't end until we hear from you. Norma Henning?
I have no comments at this time. Thank you.
Okay.
But it was a great meeting. I really enjoyed the guests. It was a really great meeting. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Rosalie Smith?
Just have one announcement. Safe and Sound Hillsborough has partnered with the Children's Board of Hillsborough County to premiere screening tomorrow, August 6th, of a conversation on No Small Matter. It's a documentary on early education. And so we invite you all to come and be part of that conversation. It'll run from tomorrow till the 10th, and then there'll be a panel discussion on August 11th. I can pass that information along to staff to share with the group.
Thank you very much. Marsha, are you on the line? I can't hear her yet. Okay. We will continue on. My screen has moved. Madge?
Hey, no major announcement for me, guys. I wanted to just say I miss you all. And actually, you know what? I do have an announcement. If you know any young people who are interested in the things that we are doing here today, and who want to kind of be a part of a nonprofit organization that really does a lot of good in the community, I am on fellow of the New Leaders Council. And they have a wonderful program that is free to do if you're selected. So if you guys know any young people that are interested in applying to be in this council, it's pretty heavy time commitment, but it is free, and it's like chicken soup for your soul. So I encourage anyone, if you want any more information about it, please reach out to me. There's a lot of great alumni in the community who are part of it, or just Google New Leaders Council Tampa Bay.
Thank you very much. Marsha?
Yeah, I have nothing to say anyway.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Thank you for being so patient with me.
That is fine. Thank you for calling in. Non-POC?
I don't really have any specific announcement, but I really appreciate for bringing two wonderful speakers for today, and that was very helpful. And can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Okay. And Jamal, thanks for sharing. And I'm really sorry what has happened to Beirut, Lebanon. And my heart goes out to people in Lebanon and Lebanese Americans.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It looks like we covered everyone. I do want to thank you all for your time. Thank you so much to staff, Ellie, Zuleika, Albert Coleman, for just working to get our presenters tonight. I know for us, it was very important for us to have them here to speak on behalf of their various areas, because there's a lot of conversation around it and the citizens need to know what's going on. So thank you so much for getting that done for us, and we're looking forward to having additional educational opportunities moving forward. Mr. Chernesky and I are also on that list for the website to be at the conclusion of our terms, because we came in on somebody else's term. So we're not sure how that's going to work. We may see you next month. That would be nice. But if not,
I feel like that
we'll see anyway.
I feel like this will be like our third vote in like 3 years. Like,
I know, but I'm looking forward to moving forward or in any way supporting the council. I know we've had some time over the past couple of years that we haven't always had quorum. I really want to say I appreciate everyone for recognizing the position we're in right now as a community and how important our work is and our presence is to this conversation. And we are just now getting started. So I really appreciate everyone being here and engaging and being committed to what you signed up for. If there is nothing else, I would like to see if anyone is in opposition to us adjourning the meeting at 8:03 p.m. Seeing none, meeting adjourned. Have a great month. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Have a great month. Thank you.